Bonjour, bonjour les amis. Welcome to a new virtual tour with France with Véro. This is Véro talking to you. And today I thought I would bring you to a place, a special place, located a few minutes outside Tours, the city of Tours in the Loire Valley. This is a place where I have taken France with Véro patrons in the past. In fact, last winter there was a wine tasting event and we came here and I promised myself I would return so I could enjoy the plants, the flowers. Now, of course, I hadn't counted on the heat wave and the successive waves of the heat wave that we've had this summer, the summer of 2022. But it's still a magical place and I'd like to show you around today. We are at the priory, the Saint Cosme priory. I am walking right now in what used to be the monks' garden. Saint Cosme, C-O-S-M-E, a priory, a former monastery that was created in the 11th century on what was essentially an island right off of Tours on the Loire River. It's not an island anymore today, but this monastery that later became a priory survived all the way to the 17th century. So I thought I would show you around this section. Here would have been the kitchens of the priory. Picture a complex, really, a small city, a religious community. And today it's a lovely place where you can come outside Tours. It's never crowded here. They run some very interesting visits. If you'd like to know more about the history of the place, you can see that they have everything set up so visitors can enjoy a nice time in the shade of these platanes, plane trees. So like I said, the priory was founded in the 11th century. But the heyday of the priory was really the 14th and 15th century, when French King Louis XI settled down here. In fact, he had a chateau nearby and he ruled France from here, from Tours. And so resources were spent at that point to work on the buildings. The church, which is in front of us in particular, they worked on the church quite a bit. Sadly, in 1944, the summer of 1944, at the end of World War II, Allied bombings destroyed a lot of the buildings here. And after the war, it was decided that they would work on select buildings, including this one in front of us, which used to be the refectory. So where the religious community would eat. This is why I just showed you that kitchen in the back, or where the kitchen used to be. Today, this is an exhibit place. It's quite beautiful in here. It's, of course, in the Romanesque style. It's one of the oldest places. And you can see that this is a magnificent structure. The stained glass is contemporary. It's about 10 years old. It was done by a French-Chinese artist. And so they use this former refectory as an exhibit place today. And this is where that event where I took patrons was taking place on our virtual tour. It was a wine tasting event. So this place was bustling, very different today. So Romanesque architecture, beautifully restored. So this part at least could be saved. You can see some of the stained glass I was mentioning earlier, the colorful ones here. So as you visit the site, you can picture the peace and quiet, even today, that all these canons and monks could enjoy as they were praying and living here on site. There was a beautiful church. Unfortunately, it didn't survive the bombings in 1944, but you can still picture what it looked like. The chapter room was here. See, you have signs everywhere that tell you what used to be where. The chapter room was right here. The church in the background. The place where we came from, where the orchard was, as well as the monks' garden. And I started this walk, this tour, under the pergola, where we saw those grapes and berries. And so they had different types of garden. This one was a scented garden. You can still see some roses on the left-hand side. I'm sure May and June are probably the best time to come here to see everything in bloom. But we're going to go around and take a look. So people stayed here, of course, and so you had a guest house, hôtellerie. Hôtellerie, you see the word here. So this would have been where you stayed if you came here, which is why in the building we just passed, there were also guest kitchens. So this must have been a very comfortable place. Pretty spacious. You can see the damage that time and the bombs as well have caused to this structure. Now the estate was massive. There are woodlands in the back. It keeps going. It wasn't just this part I'm showing you. There was a lot of land around it as well. On the left here was a medicinal herb garden. And the plants are all labeled. Here's a nice view of the refectory. And in the back, the refectory is right there, and this is the guest house right here. Very peaceful. The priory is actually located by a very busy road, so you can hear traffic. But once you're down here, it's very, very quiet. So the church was built over time. And during the heyday of the priory in the 14th and 15th century, they decided to raise it, to raise the floors because of the floods from the Loire is a river that tends to flood, and so they raised everything up at that time, and the style became more of a Gothic style. You see a couple of chapels in the back. We're going to walk straight past them, and here was a smaller church. And right next to it was a cemetery, a religious cemetery, where those trees are, right here. Ten years ago, they did more excavations, and they found a lot of vestiges as well as graves. And so they could picture even better what the site looked like. I'll take you through the church to wrap up this visit. But really the priory, the Saint Cosme priory, its claim to fame is the fact that a famous French poet named Ronsard lived here. He was the prior here, and the prior was in charge of the administration, the management of the domain. He didn't necessarily have to be a priest. In fact, Ronsard never took the vows. You can see this beautiful architecture. This would have been his house. The logis is the word they use in French for the main house. And this would have been his garden. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Ronsard and his poems. Nature was really at the core of all his work, and he's famous for the poems where he mentions roses. But truth be told, he was a devout gardener, and he often mentioned plants and flowers in his work. And so this would have been his garden, his potager. You can take a few steps. When we were here a few months ago in the winter, of course, none of this was here. And all the plants are labeled on these little pots. This one says artichoke. And in fact, here is an artichoke. Asperge, asparagus. And it's very appropriate when you visit a site where Ronsard lived for 20 years and died, in fact, in his early 60s. It's very appropriate to see some roses. That's gotta be basil. Let's see. Basilic. Indeed. Basilic. So we can picture Ronsard living in the house, running the priory, writing, gardening, and enjoying this peaceful garden in the late 16th century. So like I said, he lived here for about 20 years. And during his time, he was very close to the monarchs in charge of France. Catherine de Medici, the powerful queen, her son, Charles IX, visited him here. Carotte de Carenton. Poiré. Now some of you are probably gardeners. I'm not a gardener, but I'm sure you recognize a lot of these plants. Really nice view of the church, the chapels of the church here and the house in front of us. So I thought I would take you inside. I wasn't able to do this the day I live streamed because of a weak signal, but today I can do this. Let's go inside Monsieur de Ronsard's home. There are several floors. You can go all the way up to the attic. And in fact, the frame is in very good condition. See the stairs. Oh, look, this is interesting. 1662. Now, there's something I'd like to show you here, but I think we may have to come back. So I'll go upstairs first. So yes, like I was saying, the timber frame of the attic dates back to the High Middle Ages. I believe it's in very good shape, but it's a dark room, so I'm not going to take you up there. I'm going to show you other rooms instead. So this is where Ronsard would have lived in the second half of the 16th century. This tapestry dates back to the 17th century. Look at the thickness of the walls. And of course the stone is the tuffeau or tufa stone used in the Loire Valley. Here's another interesting room. Ronsard is here. And here's a view on the potager, the garden we just went through. There he is. I'm going up some very narrow stairs. Another room, a smaller one. Smaller fireplace. And from here, a great view of what's left of the church that was upgraded, I was going to say, in the 15th century, but sadly destroyed in part by the bombings of the summer of 1944. The smaller church we walked past, and the old religious cemetery that was next to it. Let's see. Again, down the stairs. I'm going to try to watch our step here. Feels a little bit like a maze. There are little doors. And I'm not showing you all the rooms, there are some smaller rooms as well. So these stairs is how you go up to the attic, les combles, C-O-M-B-L-E-S, with that beautiful timber frame that's very, very well preserved. The information is provided in several languages, so if you don't speak French, it's not an issue when you visit here, and the entrance fee is €6. I was waiting for other visitors to go so I could show you a few things in this room. Here is an original book, poetry book by Ronsard, dated 1555. It's quite something. And something I really like in this room is this timeline. This is a great timeline where you can follow events roughly from 1450 to the 1600s. And you have them on 3 different levels. You have what was happening in the Kingdom of France. You have what was happening in Ronsard's life while he lived here, or while he lived his life really, and then in other parts of the world as well. So if you look at the time he moved here in 1565, when he became the prior here, at the same time we had terrible religious wars happening in the Loire Valley and in the rest of the Kingdom of France. Catherine de' Medici was the regent queen, and then her sons took over. She was a widow by then. Charles IX was her second son who ruled. And then in the rest of the world, you see that Galileo was born, as well as Shakespeare, in 1564. And then by the time Ronsard died in 1585, things were still pretty violent in the Kingdom of France. Catherine de' Medici died in 1589, right after that, a few years after that, and her last son, Henry III, the last of the Valois kings, was assassinated, which of course brought about Henry IV, the good King Henry, who was the first in the dynasty of the Bourbon kings. And what was happening in other parts of the world, you have Ambroise Paré, that was in 1585, the same year Ronsard died. He was the very renowned surgeon, Ambroise Paré, and he published a big book, and that was an important piece of work. He was really renowned. However, he could not save Catherine de' Medici's husband, Henry II, who had a terrible jousting accident in a jousting tournament in Paris, and Ambroise Paré was the surgeon who operated on him, but they couldn't save him. So this is really interesting. It's like a history lesson. And you know, when you go to France and you see all these museums and landmarks, it's always very didactic, and they always have sections where kids can learn as well. But I particularly enjoy a good timeline. So this is a really nice place to brush up on your French and European history right here. And that is what I wanted you to see. But here is the courtyard, the Prieur's courtyard. He had a garden and he had his own courtyard. And in the courtyard, right next to the church, is a lovely walk. This is where you enter. The boutique is here. This is where you enter and you exit. And look at this lovely walk. We have a few roses left. And when you turn around, a lovely view of the house. Pierre de Ronsard's home for 20 years. He died here at the age of 61 and was buried in the church. And in 1933, I believe, they found his body and buried him again in the church. So I'm going to take you there and show you. This is the refectory where we stepped in earlier. Those tall cypress trees make me think of southern France. How about we stroll through the church, or what's left of it? Look where we just walked, under the roses. Here's a nice pan of the site. The refectory is on the left. The orchard, the monk's garden where we started on the left over there. And here is where Pierre de Ronsard is buried. This is his gravestone. Quite a peaceful place. I'm going back in the church. This would have been a transept of the church, I think, in this section. Nothing is left now. A peek at the house, the Prieur's house. This old church. So like I said, 10 years ago they did some excavations and found additional vestiges and gravestones as well, graves. Here's one of the chapels. Oh, what's this is really pretty. There's a lot of detail on that wall. And you know what's interesting is also, see, it's fruit that's carved here. What's interesting also is there's some color remains on the ceiling. You can see some color on the ceiling, you see? Because in the Middle Ages, churches and cathedrals used to be a lot more colorful than they are today. From here we see the side of Ronsard's home. Poor old church. But it's still pretty special, I'd say. So if you come to tour France, don't hesitate to come to the Saint Cosme Priory. There are buses coming here. It's right outside Tours. You could almost walk from my neighborhood. And there are lots of stories to tell. They have interesting visits you can sign up for, events as well, like the one I took patrons to. And I hope you can make it. Don't hesitate to like this video if you've enjoyed this virtual tour. There are many more virtual tours to be found on the France with Véro YouTube channel. And like always, you can find me several times a week on social media, Facebook and Instagram. I tell more stories and share France, la belle France, with you. If you'd like to encourage me to do more virtual tours like this one, I have a virtual tip jar on PayPal. All that information will be in the video notes. And of course, the best way to really support my small business is to join this fun community I've created on Patreon, La Bande de Véro. You will be helping me create new content as well as enjoy exclusive events and stories yourself. Like the wine tasting event I took patrons to here a few months ago. Until next time, thank you for joining me today in the beautiful Touraine at the Saint Cosme Priory. À bientôt les amis!